is 7:05 and haven't gotten any emails from folks who haven't been able to get on Zoom. So it looks like we're good to start, which is wonderful. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Abby Lee Hallett, and I am the Audience Engagement Coordinator here at the Art Gallery of Windsor. And it's my great pleasure to be on the tech side tonight for In Conversation History of Objects, which is our third conversation in our series of conversations with artists from the 2021 Windsor-Essex Triennial of Contemporary Art. For some of you, I'm sure this is not new news, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, the Windsor-Essex Triennial of Contemporary Art is the AGW signature group artist exhibition focusing on contemporary art practice in southwestern Ontario, Windsor, Essex, and Detroit. All right, so before we get into the content of our conversation today, it's always important to acknowledge and remember whose land we are on. I always like to say not only for the duration of the acknowledgement or even the event, but also something that we carry with us and that informs our actions long after the event is over. So while this conversation and recording is happening digitally, today I want to acknowledge that I am physically situated on Anishinaabe territory, the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Today, the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy are represented by Walpole Island First Nation. I want to state my respect of the historical and ongoing authority of Walpole Island First Nation over its territory. So getting into the 2021 Windsor-Essex Triennial of Contemporary Art. This year's Triennial, it's focused on the theme of conversations. So interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, we at the AGW were forced to rethink and reconsider how we could keep having critical conversations that matter to our community. Despite this uncertainty, though, art practices continued, getting richer and more varied as artists adapted to keep critical conversations alive in such an unprecedented time. As such, the Windsor-Essex Triennial of Contemporary Art set out as a starting point to see what artists in Windsor-Essex and beyond were in conversation about and why. So today we're going to be diving into another one of those conversations with our curators Ray Cronin and Lucas Cabral, and artists Cora Cluett, Lucy Howe, and Sasha Opeiko. So I will introduce Ray and Lucas, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ray, who will be our facilitator for tonight's conversation to get started. So first off, Ray Cronin is a Nova Scotia-based writer, curator, and editor. He's the author of 9 books, including John Grier, Hard Thought, and Maud Lewis, Life and Work. And Lucas Cabral is an artist, curator, and arts administrator with a background in marketing, communications, and community engagement. Lucas completed his BFA at Western University and has since held positions in public art galleries and service organizations, including the Harbourfront Centre, Macintosh Gallery, the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, AIDS Committee of Durham Region, and ArtSite Inc. So please join me in welcoming our curators and artists and some, I always say, rapturous Zoom applause. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to hand it over to Ray.
Excellent. Thank you, Abby Lee. I just also would like to thank the artists for being so patient over this long process. It's the artists, the Art Gallery of Windsor have all been, I think, as everyone has worked extremely hard to make what has been a situation beyond anybody's control, if not ideal, at least certainly much better than it could have been. It remains, I'm very proud of the exhibition that we collectively put together, and I live in hope that I'll get to see it in person one day soon. The format that we're going to do tonight, so everyone knows, is each of the artists are going to do a short presentation about their work in the exhibition, um, and provide some context for that in terms of their practice. Then it'll be open for questions from the audience. I'll introduce each artist before they speak, and if you're all slow with questions, I'll prompt them. But based on what's happened in the past in these conversations, I don't think that's going to happen. So to start, the first presentation is going to be Cora Cluett. And Cora was born in Nova Scotia and educated at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design for her BFA, as well as at the University of Guelph for her MFA. Her paintings and photographs have been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions that have taken place in international, national, and regional venues, including the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Painting Centre in New York, the Albright Knox, and the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. She has received numerous artist grants and awards, and her work is represented in many public, corporate, and private collections. She was elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts in 2014. And Cora, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to do is I wanted to thank Abby Lee Hallett for her great communication skills and help. And I wanted to thank also Nicole McCabe and, of course, Lucas Cabral and Ray Cronin for including my work. I'm so incredibly grateful to be part of this exhibition and have this work in the exhibition. And also Stephen Nielsen, who's the preparator for this is, maybe we could go to the first slide, Abby, the first image, not me. So this is my work for the exhibition. And it was made primarily over the past 2 years. The bulk of the work was put together during the past year, since the pandemic. And what it consists of, it's the gridded work in the background, and it's a series of, right now there's 50 black and white analog photographs of decanters, and the piece is called Lost at Sea. It's an ongoing work, and the way that the work is, each image is constructed is through an analog process. It's called a photogram. So basically you take an object and you put it in contact with a light sensitive sheet of paper and expose it to light, and it captures the cast shadow, and then they're hand processed. So if we could go to the next image, please. So the work, this body of work kind of evolved. I'm going to show just two images, two slides of previous works, just to give some background. I inherited some pressed glass work, glass pieces from Nova Scotia. And so I had them sort of sitting around, and I kept looking at them, and then I would go into thrift stores, and I kept noticing all of these sort of decorative glassware that kind of spoke to me in some way, because it's the kind of glassware that tends to sit and is not particularly fashionable or coveted, right? So even in a thrift store, the pricing starts to go down, and I kind of took note of that, and it kind of held my attention. And so if you could go to the next image. And the objects are, candy dishes and vases and other kinds of serving dishes. And they're empty vessels that have sometimes have a purpose. Sometimes it's just purely decorative. And so I started collecting them and making photograms with them. And the first image that I made, I was really surprised at the trails of light that were kind of created by the light refraction in the making of the image, and also how the images could, you have the same circumstance, you set it up, you make the image, you process it, you discover that something's off kilter, because you're doing everything in a dark room. And I wouldn't be happy with the composition or the way they were kind of laid out, and I'd go back and make another one. And then the light refraction would be slightly different. And so I just really loved the sort of ghostly trails that were created from these. If you could go to the next image, please. And so the thing too that kind of struck me, and that I started to notice, because I just kind of kept going back to the thrift stores in my hometown here, and I live in Elmira, and it's a fairly kind of Calvinistic area of the country, and that I kept finding these decanters, and they were different. I would go in, and the next week there'd be another one and another one, and they're all completely different. So I started just gathering them, and the work sort of evolved from there. If you could go to the next image, so you can see that they're, depending on the quality of the glass, sometimes the crystal, with its sort of cut glass versus a glassware like this that's got sort of an etched pattern in it, it creates these different kinds of light refractions. And so I just kept making them, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. And then I heard about the exhibition, the Triennial. So I decided to apply. And so if you could go to the next slide. So this is kind of the setup I started looking at, and these are all the glass decanters that I keep gathering, and there's even more. I think I even found some just in the recent little break in the lockdown, and again, all completely different. And I also wanted, for me, the criteria for collecting them was that they had to come from this area, from this town. So I even though in some of the antique shops, they're filled with different kinds of decanters, and they're really beautiful. For me, for some reason, they had to come from the thrift shops here in town. And so they're all, from here. And in fact, there's even within the last 2 years, they opened a bargain basement thrift shop, which is even cheaper than the other thrift shops, where you can buy things by the pound. And a lot of the decanters came from that particular thrift shop. For me, there's a little bit of an analogy from, I think, with the female body in some ways, with these sort of empty vessels. I think a lot about associations, with, again, my mother's generation of women who might use these for, bring them out for really sort of special kinds of occasions and things like that. And if you could go to the next image, it's just a close-up of just where I had the work sort of installed in a kind of a grid. And I in my studio space for my studio visit for the exhibition. And so that's just to give a kind of an idea of just how varied the shapes. Some look more masculine, some are, again, a little bit more, have maybe more of a feminine sort of a shape. The other thing that I noticed as well is that, they could spend a considerable amount of time just sitting on a shelf until they were kind of marked down. And again, this I don't know, like it had a little bit of a pathos for me, the objects themselves, that the history of them. So I can see why I'm part of this particular talk. And if you could go to the next image. So again, that's just another detail of one of the decanters. When it came time to make decisions about how to display them, I decided that I didn't want them to be framed or put under glass, that I wanted the prints to be exposed and vulnerable. But so I have them mounted to aluminum. And even in that process, it's a little bit fussy. The surfaces are a little bit delicate. So they can mark up and they can kind of scratch a little bit easily, I guess you could say. So then if you could go to the last image. So this is the install. And I'm really, really thrilled to see the work, even if it is virtually installed in a gallery space. I'm looking forward to actually seeing the work in the flesh. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the piece that's in the show. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Cora. And there'll be time for people to ask questions afterwards, but we're just going to move on now to Lucy Howe. And Lucy is an artist and an arts educator based in Windsor, Ontario. She has exhibited across the country at galleries such as Art Noir, Montreal, the NASCAD Port Loggia Gallery in Halifax, and the Koffler Center for the Arts in Toronto. Howe works as the Make Lab technician in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Windsor, holds a BFA from NASCAD University, and an MFA from York University. And Lucy, can you please talk about your work?
Hi, sure. Thanks. First, I'd like to thank everybody at the AGW and the curators, of course, for pushing this whole exhibition forward in a chaotic time. I'm glad that it actually came to fruition and we're able to actually do this. Yeah, we could go to the first slide. Thanks, Abby. So first, just a little context about my work. I generally work with existing familiar forms, like lampposts and chain link fence, and quite often furniture. I usually modify these objects. I'm usually more of a builder, and I try to subvert their intended function and disrupt their rational form, create a bit of anthropomorphization in the piece. It's just a way of sort of questioning reality and looking at reflecting on different personal states of being. So this particular work, what you're looking at right now, is actually just documentation of the creation of the work, which is everything is fine. And so in this particular work, I'm actually not building, I'm being very destructive and I'm destroying. The work came about basically because over the past couple of years, things are a bit intense. I found myself sitting one day at the kitchen table or at my dining room table, actually, and I was reading the news and enjoying my coffee. And on one side of the news, I had Trump spewing his rhetoric and his hatred. And on the other side, half of Australia was burning to the ground at the time. And it was just kind of overwhelming. I was really struck by all the extremes and the polarization going on in the world. And so a table and doing something to a table sort of seemed really appropriate. The sort of political loss of common ground for conversation, mutual respectful conversation seemed to be getting lost, and also all the environmental extremes that were going on in the world. So if we could go to the next slide. Thanks, Abby. So a table, it seemed appropriate at the time because it's where we get together. It's where we commune. It's where we break bread, where we nourish ourselves, and we check in with loved ones and have discussions and communicate. And we weren't doing that. Things were sort of taking a big shift in the world. But a table is also sort of metaphorically, so it's a surface where our everyday lives also seem to take place. Dining room tables are used for meals and for gatherings, but they're also sometimes used as a desk or where we play board games or do arts and crafts with the kids. So the surface starts to also sort of become a history of our daily lives with the wear and the tear. And so it's also, for me, a bit of a landscape of that history of our everyday lives. And so with the burning of the landscape and our lack of communication with one another, it seemed really appropriate to just burn a hole through a table at the time. And so I thought it'd be an interesting departure for my work to just go ahead and do that and be a bit more destructive, opposed to building things up and tearing things down and doing the opposite. So basically I wanted to, inflict some damage on the form and create a space of loss in the center there. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is the work installed in the end. The previous images were simply documentation, which I have and I'm looking at and I'm thinking about. But I really wanted to just present the work quietly on its own as a damaged form. And you can see Cora's work in the background there, which I really love the way it's been installed, actually, with the loss in the table and these sort of ghost forms in the background as well. If we can go to the next slide. So this is just a close-up of what we're sort of left with. The forms just sort of quietly sits charred and damaged. The surface of the object has been sort of gutted. And so there's sort of a removal or a meaningful loss of not only the literal function of the table to perform as a surface, but also the metaphorical option for gathering and communication. Again, that common ground's been sort of starting to claw back and has been burned away and is being removed. So the piece sort of exists as, a reflection on what's been going on in the world and the violence that's been inflicted upon the body. It's sort of representative of some of the trauma that's sort of being experienced in different places. And then the question is, what remains? Do we have enough of a structure left over that we're willing to fix? And does it have any value? Or does the piece just need to be torn down? Do we need to start again and throw that structure away? So yeah, that's kind of it for that piece. This is a bit of a shift for me in terms of making work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was great. Was that your backyard?
No, it wasn't my backyard. I had to convince a friend who lives in the country to let me burn stuff.
Okay. I always wonder what the neighbors would think as, living next to artists.
Yeah, you can't do it in your alley. People get mad.
Okay. Our next presenter is Sasha Opeiko. Sasha is based in London, Ontario. Her practice varies between painting, drawing, media, installation, and collaborative projects. Sasha received a BFA from the University of Windsor and an MFA from the University of Victoria. She is currently enrolled in the PhD in Art and Visual Culture program at Western University, developing a research creation methodology that intersects themes of melancholy, speculative realism, and the memory and life of images and domestic objects. Her work has been exhibited widely at galleries such as Artsite Inc., the Thames Art Gallery, Deluge Contemporary Art in Victoria, Manifest Gallery in Cincinnati, and the Art Gallery of Peterborough. I'll turn it over to you, Sasha.
Thank you very much. Also, I as well want to thank everyone at the Art Gallery of Windsor for making it all happen. Everyone has been wonderful. So yeah, Abby, could we go to the first slide maybe? Okay, so the title of this project is Obraz Abrez Ostatek, which translates from Russian as image or appearance, edge or slice, and remnant. So I used fragments of appropriated images in combination with collected Soviet era objects. For the part of the project presented at the gallery, I specifically worked with sections of film stills from Soviet films from the 1970s and 80s, focusing closely on domestic objects and interiors. I developed this work during a residency at the Banff Center last year, which allowed me to work on a scale larger than what I'm usually accustomed to. So in this way, the work was a bit of a departure from how I normally work. The film stills were blown up so that they appear blurry or slightly pixelated, and the fuzziness of the images is emphasized by the fact that the films were accessed through YouTube, which means that the image quality was kind of poor to begin with. Could we go to the next image? Thank you. So that's just a close-up. You could go to the next one as well. Thanks. So I'm interested in the loss of clarity that occurs in images when they are transferred from one medium to another. For me, this is also parallel to the loss of definitive context that comes with collecting antiquated Soviet era objects. The combination of the found images from the films and actual Soviet era ephemera of confusion between idealized and fictionalized domesticity and actual production of domestic or everyday objects. But in both cases, the production was driven by Soviet ideology, imbibed with the culture's design sensibilities and desires. We can move on to the next image or two. Okay, so for me, images are kind of entangled with thingness. My approach to working with images is to consider them as objects. And in this project, the printed images are left to hang in space, emphasizing their physical presence. Images are not only representations or appearances, but objects that contain surface, substance, and memory. Images are both physical objects and concept objects that are formed by ideological production of culture. In this sense, images are material things as well as ghostly or spectral entities, and the collected objects that I use can be considered to be images as well, always cut up in their appearances. And because I consider images to be objects and vice versa, I recognize that they have their own vitality, their own ways of moving through the world that are separate from our usual anthropocentric expectations of what is considered to be alive. I see the world of visual culture as very much a living organism that feeds into our sensibilities and desires, something that is not altogether in our control. We can move on to the next. Thank you. Another key aspect of my work is its focus on melancholy and how melancholy reflects processes of fragmentation, distortion, loss. Melancholy has been an ongoing theme in my practice for many years, taking on different forms, but it always revolves around a sense of withdrawal that comes with things that are in slow processes of disintegration or distancing. Melancholic objects seem to diffuse, they turn partially inaccessible, while reducing perception itself to the withdrawn realm of objects. Melancholy is intent on perceiving what resists perception. So these constructed assemblages were made in two stages. First, I composed the initial arrangements, and then I photographed them I had the details printed to scale on transparent film, and then that was reincorporated back into the constructions. So this was a kind of visual melancholic strategy for me to give the images and objects surface reflections that extend from themselves. The doubling extends the life of the image, morphing the constructions from things looking like images to images looking like things. The project on view at the gallery is focused more specifically on the melancholy of nostalgia. Nostalgia is motivated by a kind of separation from closure, and it can be expressed through collection, recontextualization, and circulation of cultural traces. These pieces are assembled collections of cultural traces, and the history of these images of domestic life and the collected Soviet materials express a layering of indefinite time. It is unclear from what part of history they come from. So the assemblages are not only material, but temporal as well. So we can scroll through. There's a couple of details. So you can see the kind of doubling that's going on there. You can go on to the next. And the next one as well. And I think one more. So yeah, thank you. So I had also produced a video piece for the show. Not for the show, but it's on exhibit. It's called Incidental Television and Soviet Films. And it's a video loop montaged from found footage of televisions observed in Soviet films. An audio track consists of appropriated USSR promotional voiceovers from commercials for TV models, mixed with sounds of domestic background noises also taken from Soviet films. The collected moving images are cropped from the full frame of the film, and they're enlarged to isolate the televisions as objects of attention. Some images are out of focus and they appear faint or degraded through the entropy of lossy data compression. The content of the moving images emitted from the televisions staged as background scenery in films it's kind of arbitrary, and it just happens to be what it is. So it's this weird mixture of seemingly random images. The clips are overlapping, fleeting, morphing fragments of information, and the shifting frame of the television flows through mixed iterations of itself, never quite in focus, always referring to an ambiguous past. The video is a kind of study of the television as an object that was ever present in Soviet households, depicted to seem relatable and plausible as a representation of real life, but it's still portrayed within fictional narratives. So we can go on to the next image. Thank you. So this project is not the first time I had worked with sections of found images related to the history of the USSR. This previous project is titled When People Came Out of the Forest, There Was Nothing. And this was a series of detailed drawings based on sections of found photographs of World War II in Belarus. I was working through my own engagement with that part of Belarusian history to extract a general melancholic mood that I had acquired through childhood by visiting museums and watching films or anecdotal stories. I had chosen to work with landscape as a signifier of mood, so the sections of photographs that I was working with were isolated parts that showed landscape amidst images of battle or aftermath. Again, I was driven by the interpretation that images carry their own affective histories and traces. And I think there's one more image from this series. So we can move on to the next one, Abby, please. I was also working on a series of watercolor paintings titled Objects in Soviet Films, which was before the work that's on view at the gallery. So these were detailed studies of Soviet era film stills on Soviet notebook paper. So as with the works in the exhibition, the images for these paintings were derived from isolated sections of films showing background objects in domestic life. It was a kind of obsessive translation of digital visual information representing obscure domestic things, attempting to find definition in blurry, almost abstracted depictions. The objects are flattened and cultural reference to Soviet imagination were kind of folded into these small, vaguely familiar sections of shapes and colors. I think there's two more of these in the slideshow. And this one is Constructor. So like the objects in Soviet films, this is also a painting of a part of domestic interior, except here, instead of using Soviet notebook paper, the images accumulated onto a set of objects, which are pencils from a popular manufacturer, Constructor. And the next piece that was also part of this whole kind of Soviet theme. This one is called History of the Communist Party of the USSR, and it consists of a found book of the same title and a watercolor study on Soviet paper based on a film still of a burning USSR history textbook. Again, it is an assemblage of found culturally specific and outdated material, and it's combined with a painted study of a specific section of visual ephemera. This work is kind of constructed around reflexivity, depicting the symbolic destruction of USSR history emerging from an actual obsolete USSR history book. So this kind of reflexivity is also evident in the work on exhibit at the gallery. The work is about layering appearances of diffused cultural matter and historical debris, and seeing how it refers to itself and how these pieces affirm their own existence as objects and images, even as they're removed from originally intended context. So that's all for me. Thank you. Sorry if that was a bit long.
That was fascinating, Sasha. Thank you. Now people can, if anyone has questions, you can just enter them into the Q&A. But while that's happening, I actually would like, hearing you all three talk about your work, there is this very clear sense of objects, of you all being aware of the histories or the lives that objects bring into the world, they carry in the world. How much do you think of, are you using what's already there in the work, are in the objects that you make into your work, or do you think of yourselves as adding new histories to the objects you're using? How do you think about those, the histories that these objects bring? How are you affecting those histories? If that makes, just to jump in there with that, is if you can. I don't mean to.
I think for me it's both. I work with what's already there. I like to be I like to have fidelity to what I'm working with, but I also understand that in making art, you're also creating new images that have their own lives. So it's kind of like an extension for me. So I do both.
Cora?
I think I'm just, yeah, I mean, I think I'm taking these objects and I'm paying homage to them or something, in some way that they are. And I've kept all of, I have to keep and catalog and keep all of the objects that I'm using. And I haven't figured out what to do with them, to be honest. It's a dilemma, because this is a completely different way for me. I've never made still life work before. I've definitely appropriated, and in my trajectory in my career, I've appropriated objects and brought them in and used them, but I've never made still life work before. And I don't know what to do with these objects that I'm amassing that were already kind of cast off. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer the question, to be honest.
I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, for myself, a similar thing. I'm interested in the objects and of course, the cultural histories that they have and the personal histories, and then taking those and moving them into a new form of self-expression or history. And but then with this particular piece, again, it was a breakaway for me to do something more destructive than constructive. And so it's almost erasing a history, but at the same time, giving it a new mark, but quite a dramatic one. So yeah, it sort of is floating somewhere in between, I guess you could say.
Great, thank you. So the first question is from, well, Alice Welsh wants to know, Lucy, why you guys didn't get to bring your projects, but I think that one is when you guys can talk about them.
Because we're not allowed to set off the fire alarm.
But this one is the only one that's coming up. Maybe Abby Lee, because I can't get the Q&A to open.
Hello, yes, no problem. Let me just jump in here because there are some questions coming in through the chat. So let's see, we have a question from Sindra. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And it's for Cora, and Sindra's asking what about the purpose of the original objects, the elegant presentation of alcohol? That is Sindra's question.
Oh, can you, what about the purpose of the elegant presentation of alcohol? Well, it took on kind of kind of an interesting context in a way. And I think that's sort of where the title of the work, Lost at Sea, tied in, because they are decanters. And with the pandemic, a lot of us are imbibing a lot more than we normally would, perhaps. So I did consider that to be part of it, but also I think it's the grid for me originally started to kind of function, and it's not literal, but I do think of it a little. I mean, I love a grid. I love a good grid, but it's like a little bit like a calendar as well. And so I wondered, it can grow, it can unfold, it can, it suggests going beyond, and that sort of, I guess, part of what we've all been experiencing over the past year has definitely played into it, for sure. I think in my own family, issues with alcoholism definitely ties in, but that's a personal thing that kind of attracted me to to it to begin with. And in fact, that first image of those, the two decanters together that aren't part of the larger work, that particular piece I call the twins, for personal reasons, but it's for, I had twin brothers, and they've both passed away. And that was really the first piece that I made with using the decanters. And it kind of, yeah, I mean, I think it is, I don't know, I'm not being very articulate, but it's, I think it's inherent in the object. I think your question is, yeah, it's just, it's part of what those decanters sort of speak to. They are an elegant presentation of something that can be incredibly addictive and destructive, but at the same time, used sparingly, comforting. I don't know what else to say. Does that answer your question in a convoluted way?
So Lucy, there's a question for you about the process of burning as it relates to control. If that's something that's important in the work, and how did you negotiate with the unruly temperament of fire? Thank you, Eva, for that.
Yeah, good question. Hi, Hiba. Yeah, it's surprisingly easy to control, which was sort of shocking to me. I did a few test burns before burning that specific table, and using coals initially, actually, to burn through the wood. It takes longer than you think it's going to. It's funny. I was expecting it to be really quick and dramatic and overwhelming and a bit of a panic, but it was slow, and it took a really long time. And it was a lot of standing around and watching it happen, and then maybe maneuvering the coals a little bit and playing with the shape, like you suggest. There is actually a lot of control in that, which is weird because when you think of fire in terms of household objects and homes burning, it always looks out of control and like a complete panic, because that's when we see it. We see it once it's become this terrorizing thing. But at that scale, it was really easy to control. And so there is a little bit of that, because without getting too convoluted into weird politics stuff, I mean, there is a certain amount of control going on. And so I really, I didn't want the whole structure to be completely lost, because the idea is also, how far can this thing burn before it completely falls apart? And I wanted it to be recognizable enough that we still had a relationship to it, and we had a tie to it. But is it, I mean, if you found that in an alley, you wouldn't say, great, I'm going to take it home, it's a table, because it's half ruined. So is it ruined too much, or is it salvageable, is sort of the play point that I wanted to continue with. But it is fun to burn things, and that might happen more in the future. I don't know.
That's great. Sasha, there's a question for you as well, which is from Nora Harvey. What was the main subject matter of your selection of photographs in the USSR era? You mentioned landscape, buildings, people.
For that body of work, I specifically focused on landscape, and I had collected digitally a lot of photographs from World War II around Belarus, of like battles and after battles, and I was thinking about landscape and what is the life of the landscape during wartime, and what kind of residual mood does that all have. So I would zoom in just on the sections of the photo that would have some kind of landscape happening, or the ground, or anything that did not have people in it. So it was kind of important for me to remove the human in that context, just to focus on kind of the natural world and the mood that carries in an image. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think we've got one last question left. It's for you, Cora, from Alice Welsh. She says her mother had a lot of cut glass perfume bottles, which have a lot of memories. They also remind her of a project they did in a photography class, making cyanographs with personal objects. Have you tried that?
Yeah, actually I did. When I contact printing or making photograms, that's one of the first things that you do with when you're learning photography, analog photography to begin with. But when I started working with these particular objects, I was working with cyanotypes and experimenting with those because their cyanotype chemicals are so cheap and cheerful. So you can, mix them up, do 50 sheets for next to nothing, and then test them out in sunlight. So yeah, I did do some experiments with cyanotypes. They're a lot of fun to work with, and they're very environmentally friendly too, because it's just salt. They're just salts. So yeah, yep, I did.
Abby Lee?
Yes, jumping in. Sorry, I saw something come in the Q&A. I wasn't sure if someone was sliding in the last question, but Alice was just saying, cool, thanks. So thanks for your enthusiasm, Alice. And oh my goodness, thank you to Cora, Sasha, Lucy, and Ray for this conversation this evening. It has just been such a pleasure to listen, to take in all of your insights and the facts about the artistic process and all of your answers. So insightful. I can see in the chat people are really appreciative of your time. So thank you so much. And to everybody who came and brought their wonderful questions as well. We thank you for your time. So I'm just going to hop in and share my screen very quickly, as I've just got a couple of other wonderful talks to discuss. So if this was your first, second, or third talk, not to worry. If you want to come to more, there are two more. One is next Thursday, May 20th. I should also mention they're both at the same time, so 7 o'clock. And one on May 20th is Text in Space Speaking to Your Audience. And on Thursday, June 3rd, we have Extending Media. So we would love to see you there. If you're able to attend, you can register through agw.ca/events, which I'll just drop in the chat really quickly here. But, if this is where we part, then I just want to say again, a huge thank you to everybody for spending your Thursday evening with us. It has just been lovely, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night and rest of your week as well. So take care to everyone, and hope to see you again soon. See you again soon, I suppose.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Erin.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.